Here we go. 406 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Sarah Bedford is with us from the Washington Examiner as Tucker Carlson engages in one-on-ones with each of the Republican presidential candidates today out of Des Moines, Iowa. She'll give us her sense of how that's all going. And Kurt Schlichter is here at 5:30, the Town Hall senior columnist. We'll get into the latest Joe Biden scandal as he takes a deep whiff of a child. It's one of the weirdest videos yet of the president of the United States being very creepy with children. Remember, he had promised at one point that he would be much more respectful of the space of other human beings. That promise disappeared within minutes, and we've since been living with the consequences of that here. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Started earlier this program in the program with some of the audio of South Carolina Senator Tim Scott sitting on stage with Tucker Carlson earlier in Des Moines, Iowa. Tim Scott didn't fare well. He was lukewarm in some of his answers on kind of how things are going to end in Ukraine and what is the limit of our support? How do we bring it to a peace? He tried to dodge some of the questions around the munitions we've been providing at the expense of our own stockpiles. And he filibustered a lot of the time by kind of meandering around the stage and giving stump speeches rather than just engaging Tucker directly, certainly at times where he appeared to be nervous to answer the questions. Now we move on to the Arkansas governor, Asa Hutchinson, who is for some reason running for president of the United States. And so Tucker had some questions for him today, as you would expect. And I want to start with a flashback for you, because when Tucker had his show on Fox News, he mixed it up with Asa Hutchinson over Hutchinson's decision to veto a bill that would have blocked the chemical damage of children who were sucked into this cruel transgender industry, this demented gender ideology. And here is Tucker's exchange back on Fox News, and it plays an important role in today's exchanges. Listen.
Let me emphasize, Tucker, you are a conservative. You have a great background in that. Where are we getting back to the limited role of government, that we don't have to invoke ourselves in every societal position out there? Let's limit the role of government. Let's let parents and doctors make decisions.
Then why don't we allow 18-year-olds to drink beer in Arkansas? Why don't we allow them to get tattoos? Why don't we allow 15-year-olds to get married? You vetoed a bill that would have protected children, not adults, children, to whom a different standard applies, from a life-altering permanent procedure that has effects we can only guess at, but the early indication is they're very serious and very negative in some cases. And now you're telling me you do that because you're a friend of limited government? Okay, then why are we preventing kids from drinking? Sincere question. Or getting married? Sincere question. Having sex?
Yeah, so this conversation picks up essentially where that television conversation left off some time ago. Tucker is, of course, he's trying to be very polite with these candidates. He was invited as a guest of this Family Leadership Summit, but he wants to make sure he asks a good question. So you can hear it in his tone. He's trying to be respectful, but he really would like an answer to some of these questions.
So I wanted to talk to you about your veto of the anti-puberty blocker trans surgery bill in April of 2021. At the time, you said that the bill was extreme and that it would interfere with the treatment of minors seeking to transition from male to female or female to male. Given, and I'm not attacking you for it, but I am asking if in the subsequent 2 years you've had rethinking of that. Have you reassessed your view on it since then?
Well, first of all, I want to ask, how many of you all are parents in this room? I'm a parent as well, and what I believe in is that parents ought to raise their children. I believe that parents ought to be in control, and I also believe in the Constitution. I believe that God created two genders, and that there should not be any confusion on your gender. But if there is confusion, then parents ought to be the one that guides the children.
Holy cow. Are you listening to the answer he just gave? So he says, I believe God created two genders, but parents can override God. That's what he just told you. Now, in terms of, don't you dare hide behind parental rights in order to abuse children. What a preposterous position. Abusing children is not on the menu. In terms of a parent's right to make decisions about their child, abusing the kid, sorry, that's not on the menu. That's not on the menu. Mutilating children, not on the menu. Where you send your kid to school, definitely on the menu. What your kid is being taught and you being entitled to knowing about that, definitely on the menu. Abusing, no, not on the menu. We as a society agreed to that a long time ago. And so Asa Hutchinson is hiding behind the parental rights movement, the very powerful and successful parental rights movement, to justify the mutilation of kids. Well, if you want to do that, you can do it. It's kind of your choice. No. That's not on the menu. You can't pump your kid full of heroin. That's not on the menu. So Tucker goes on. He says, wait a second. You're kind of making it seem like some of these things are just like, temporary lifestyle choices. You realize the alterations that you are for here by vetoing this bill are permanent.
You had said that you drew the line at castration of physical altercation of a child's body because it's permanent. But in the subsequent 2 years, I think we've learned that hormone therapy for prepubescent children is permanent. It changes the bone structure. It changes the brain of the child. A lot of people believe, including me, that it destroys the child's life.
You hear what Tucker's doing? Tucker's giving him the gentlest of outs. Hey, we've learned a lot over these last 2 years. Have you shifted any of your positions at all? It's okay to evolve. Go ahead, do it right here. You can evolve right on stage.
It is permanent. It's not reversible. So given that and the standard you just articulated, do you have different feelings? I mean, this is a permanent change we are making to a child. Why would we allow that if we don't allow surgery?
Well, permanent change is one issue, but also hormonal treatment is a different issue.
He's not, no, it's not. No, it's not. He didn't even listen to the question. The question, the hormonal change. He straight up said that these chemicals are permanently altering these children. And then Asa Hutchinson pretends like he didn't hear the question?
Can be a different issue. And whenever you look at the bill that I vetoed, there was not any grandfather clause in there. Again, I respect legislators that have a different view, but I think independently, I think of the parents, I think of the Constitution, and actually the court, if you read the decision of the federal judge that struck it down as unconstitutional, really sided with parents as well.
Okay. I should point something out. Walmart is headquartered in Arkansas. And they, although Target is receiving so much of the backlash because of their LGBT nonsense, Walmart is just as wedded to LGBTQ plus nonsense as Target is. They're just not so visibly on display. But if you're talking about what is going on in Arkansas, who's Asa Hutchinson really caring about? Whose opinion is he really tracking here? The answer is Walmart. That's the explanation for the ridiculous answers you're hearing right now, which is what a disgrace. He goes on. He downplays the issue of mutilating the kids.
To prevent him from going through the natural process of adolescence? How is that treatment? It seems not like treatment. It seems like something else.
Well, you have to, Tucker, I hope that we'll be able to talk about some issues. I know that...
Well, this is one of the biggest issues in the country. And
wow, whoa. So Asa Hutchinson's position here is like, oh, man, you are being frivolous. We shouldn't even be talking about this issue. It's such a small thing. I can't believe you're spending so much time on it. Please stop talking about this. It is not good for me.
That we'll be able to talk about some issues. I know that...
Well, this is one of the biggest issues in the country, and I think every person in this room would agree that it is a central issue because these are children who are being altered permanently, and you can defend that alteration, that change.
And it also gets to the center of a spiritual battle that we have in our country. It is essentially it's a proxy measurement for do you believe in reality or not? Are you abandoning reality and by extension the children who are being condemned to lives of cruelty as a result of that abandonment? Where are you on this issue? No, it doesn't affect every family. It doesn't. But as a spiritual matter, in terms of like just as a proxy fight for what is happening in our country, it is an essential question. Do you believe that men and women exist? There are distinct categories. And these are not just something that you made up. They're not social constructs.
If you like, but there's really no debate about whether or not it's permanent. And so I think it's fair to ask you in a calm, rational, and I very much hope polite way, why you would support that.
Well, I didn't say what I supported. I said what I vetoed.
I think we're looking for answers on what you support. And he's not exactly providing them. Asa Hutchinson was also asked about, this is a funny moment. He was asked how many COVID shots he took, which is a great question. How many jabs have you had, Governor?
One of the powers that government did usurp over the past several years is the right to decide what medicine you take in the form of COVID mandates. How did you feel about that? And how many COVID shots did you take? And how do you feel about it now, in retrospect?
How many COVID shots did you take?
0. But I think
pretty funny. Now, let me pause on Tucker revealing that today. My understanding, I did some cursory, internet searching. I think he did reveal this maybe at some other events, but for the most part, Tucker has been reticent to tell people that because I think he's just really enjoyed like the lefties asking him, "You got the COVID shot. You've been warning people about the COVID shot, but you got the COVID shot and you're protected." And so when they would ask, if the New York Times would call him and they'd be like, "Hey, did you get the COVID shot?" He would respond not with an answer, but instead with, "Tell me about your sexual history, including your favorite positions." That would be his response. Like, "Oh, you want to ask me about my personal details? How about some personal questions for you?" And that's been his posture. But this is the first, at least very public forum in which he has admitted, told people, "Yeah, I didn't have any shots." And the reason why it's important is, in retrospect, the media just kept on saying that Tucker was deceiving his audience, that he had gotten the jab and he's encouraging them not to, and it's so cruel and they're all going to get COVID and die because Tucker's lying. And here he is saying, no, actually, I got 0. And I don't think, did Asa Hutchinson? Well, he was definitely not ready for that. He was not. He goes, "How many you had?" He goes, 0. The crowd goes wild.
it's fair, and I could see that you recoiled when I asked you that question. And I don't think, honestly, you should be asking people about their medical care, but that became a matter of public policy. And I do think that the whole country ought to pause and assess, like, what did we just go through? How do we feel about it now? And so it's a very straightforward question.
Yeah, it's a very straightforward question. Now, Asa Hutchinson did go on to defend some of, apparently, his pro-liberty positions during all of that, which is nice. It's good to hear Republican governors stand up for liberty. That was always a good thing to see. Now, I should point out that this broadcast, although it's coming out of Des Moines, Iowa, as the family leader, it was being broadcast earlier today by the guys over at The Blaze, and they were doing some reaction to all of this. They had panel discussions, good ones, around all of this, including here's our buddy Delano Squires. You know him from the Heritage Foundation, and here's Glenn Beck as well, reacting to what you just heard, this Asa Hutchinson dumpster fire.
I don't think I have seen anything burst into flames and die that fast.
Yeah, and I think what made it so striking is that Tucker went straight to that question.
Yes.
I certainly wanted to know, which is why the governor vetoed a bill that would have banned what I call conversion therapy, right? Puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, genital mutilation for minors in Arkansas. And to say his answers were unsatisfactory is quite an understatement.
Yeah, it is an understatement. Unsatisfactory. So this guy, I don't know what he's running for, but they say it's president of the United States. But in case you were wondering about Asa Hutchinson and his role in this race, I think you have your answer. Yeah, we got Sarah Bedford coming up here moments away from the Washington Examiner, keeping an eye on everything coming out of Des Moines today. The Republican presidential candidates, one after the other, going up on stage with Tucker Carlson. And for the most part, as far as we can tell, not faring well after in each of these. In decent, respectful, but earnest questions from Tucker. Not participating today, Donald Trump. Donald Trump not participating today, the former president of the United States. His campaign claiming a scheduling conflict. I do believe that both Tucker and Trump are going to be a part of a separate event this weekend. So, that'll be an opportunity for them to get together, but not the same thing. They're not a candidate forum here. I'm not sure how to feel about this. Obviously in Trump's case, he is so far ahead of the rest of the field. He probably feels like, there's no reason to chip away at that. No reason to imperil it in any way. But at the same time, I think Iowa voters, they do want to see all of these candidates come and speak to them. And this is a big opportunity to do that and to have a conversation. And Donald Trump has never shied away from conflict, never shied away from mixing it up with his political opponents, either within the same political party or outside of it. And so it would have been, I think, good to see him on that stage to talk about the things he's learned by being president of the United States and what lessons he might derive from that, should he get another opportunity in the Oval Office. So I'm for more events, I guess, and I guess that's how I feel about it. I'm for more conversations, more testing of these guys as they try and earn your vote, which is, remember, fundamentally what it's about. They have to earn you. You are the prize to be won. They have to earn you. One more audio bite out of Asa Hutchinson's dumpster fire today. The commentator Steve Deace over on The Blaze had this to say about what he had just witnessed.
That was one of the most cringe-inducing blocks of time I have ever seen in the Iowa caucus.
Yeah, a guy who's from Iowa, who's been tracking these caucuses for a very long time and knows them very well. The Iowa caucus process, by the way, one of the neatest experiences in American politics. If you ever want to do some political tourism, at least while the country still exists, maybe this next round of the Iowa caucuses, swing on by, check out a caucus, see the way that people actually get up there. You'll have representatives from each of the campaigns. They'll stand in the middle of, say, a high school gymnasium. They'll give a 1-minute speech on why their candidate's the best. And each of these Iowans will very seriously contemplate those pitches, and then they'll go into the next room and they'll cast their votes. They'll make that decision. The Iowa caucus, a great tradition in American politics. Democrats hate it, though, because of racism. They don't like Iowa. They say there's too many white people. They're a bad political party. They really are. They really are, which is why they have to have their power taken away. Coming up, Sarah Bedford will give us the reaction. We've also got some audio of the former Vice President Mike Pence. He sat on stage with Tucker, and it got a little feisty. We'll share it with you. Good afternoon to you. 4:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Kurt Schlichter will join us, He's a funny guy. I like him. He's a lawyer, town hall senior columnist, retired infantry Army colonel. We will chat with him about Joe Biden's penchant for sniffing children on display yet again this week. So bizarre. Creepy. And Biden also skipping important meetings with world leaders because he is just so tired. What? You can call us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Des Moines, Iowa, the site of the Family Leadership Summit today. Each of the Republican candidates stepping up to the plate. Mike Pence got on stage with Tucker Carlson and began with a joke today, because if you think of Mike Pence, you always think comedy.
You know there's a recession when one of us doesn't have a job. It's me.
That would actually be two of us, Tucker.
There you go. So both are out of work. That's the joke. Mike Pence says today, I'll just play a clip or two for you, and then we'll get to our guest. Mike Pence was asked about January 6th and the fact that the left has been referring to January 6th, 2021 as an insurrection. Where is Mike Pence on that claim?
I've never used the word insurrection, Tucker, over the last 2 years, but it was a riot that took place at the Capitol that day. I saw firsthand where they'd evacuated us down to the loading dock below the Senate chamber, police officers that, as the day wore on, were streaming through 150 law enforcement officers that were assaulted. Obviously, the tragic loss of life ransacking the Capitol that occurred. But I really do believe that a day of tragedy became a triumph of freedom. And I'll always believe that by God's grace, I did my duty that day under the Constitution of the United States of America.
You notice that part? The tragic loss of life. This has become an element of fan fiction on the American left, that Trump supporters killed cops on January 6th. So Tucker asked for some clarity.
When you say the tragic loss of life, who are you referring to?
Well, obviously, Ashley Babbitt would come to mind immediately.
What do you think of the fact that she was shot?
Well, I just think it was a tragic moment, without question. But I have to tell you that seeing people assaulting law enforcement officers, smashing windows, breaking into the Capitol building. It infuriated me. And it's very likely that the restraint that was shown by law enforcement officers saved lives that day.
Yeah, okay. So it's interesting to hear him with the emphasis there. Obviously, anybody who commits an actual crime should be held accountable, but simultaneously, the left has used this as a permission slip for a gross violation of civil liberties in the United States of America. Big time. And any Republican presidential candidate worth his salt should acknowledge that very fact. All right, let's dig a little deeper into what's happening today in Des Moines. Sarah Bedford is here. She's a political and investigative reporter for the Washington Examiner. Sarah, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
It's fascinating to listen to these candidates. I played a couple already, Tim Scott, Asa Hutchinson, Mike Pence. I know Nikki Haley just wrapped up. Why are these candidates subjecting themselves to this, and what are we learning today?
You know, I wonder if a few of them were asking themselves that same question going through the Tucker treatment, because he sort of drilled down on a lot of the issues that Republican primary voters care about: transgender care for children, the U.S. support for the war in Ukraine, that a lot of mainstream media interviewers aren't asking them about because they don't really understand where the new right is on all this stuff. But Tucker does. And he sort of exposed the lack of a really coherent position on some of those key issues in some of these candidates. I think it's been a really fascinating exercise to watch.
What I'm confused by is how unprepared these candidates seem to be for the interviewer. It's not like there's a shortage of game tape footage of Tucker and his positions and the types of questions he might ask, and yet they got up on stage and seem utterly bewildered that he's asking these questions. Why?
That's a great question. I mean, yeah, Tucker is not exactly an unknown quantity. I mean, to watch Asa Hutchinson go up and try to sort of split the baby in terms of the support that he has for some types of transgender treatment for minors, but not others, and then not expect that view to sort of be dissected, or to have, you know, Tim Scott pressed on what is the end game in Ukraine, and to not have an answer ready when these are sort of the points of interest that Tucker has, but also not just Tucker. I mean, a lot of Republican primary voters, as opposed to Republican congressional members, are really opposed to how much money the U.S. is sending to Ukraine, and really want to understand why it is that this is necessary. And if there's not an end game, why should it continue? And those candidates didn't seem to have clear answers for that.
Yeah, I mean, Tucker's primary consideration throughout this has always been, okay, what's the rationale for our support and what's the end game? And there are no clear answers on that subject, and it is infuriating as just a normal person to hear all of this, who sends his taxpayer money to Washington on an annual basis, and have to listen to all this and go, wait a second, you're not even going to give me a rationale for this? And meanwhile, Tucker keeps on raising all of these domestic considerations and pointing out our country's falling apart. I noticed homelessness and our collapsing border and all of the deaths due to fentanyl have been top of mind for Tucker today. Do you get the impression that they are also top of mind for the candidates?
I think that a lot of these candidates aren't linking the two, even though in many Americans' minds they are linked, right? A lot of the candidates are, you know, sort of locked into the think tank talking points about what it means for sovereignty or American interest to be engaged in Ukraine, but they don't see the connections that normal people make walking to work through the city that they might commute to, seeing all this homelessness and blight, and wondering why he just saw a headline that another $10 billion of cluster munitions were sent to Ukraine when there's not enough money to clean up the open drug use outside his office. And I think that's something that a lot of politicians in Washington aren't recognizing, that people are drawing connections between those two things, and you can't disentangle them for, you know, some academic esoteric reasons for why we should be engaged in Ukraine. People want to know the real straight answer.
Yes, of course. Do you get the impression that any of the candidates improved their position in the primary today?
Almost none of them, with an asterisk that I thought that it was just, it's interesting to watch how good at retail politics Tim Scott is. You know, Tucker was asking him a question about defunding the Pentagon and why the Pentagon's payroll should be justified with all of these people who are being sent to Ukraine, and, you know, they're not doing enough here at home. And Tim Scott just sort of did take control of the conversation a little bit, and he jumped out of his seat and he said, you know, everybody get on your feet. Let's take a poll. Do we think we need 80,000 IRS agents? I mean, he totally changed the subject, but he showed the mastery of working a crowd that I think some of the other candidates clearly don't have. They sort of withered under Tucker's scrutiny. But I didn't really see that in Tim Scott, even if substantively he wasn't quite there. I think charisma-wise, it's interesting to see that Tim Scott is sort of a sleeper talent in that arena.
Interesting. So Donald Trump not participating today. The explanation from his campaign, as it so often is for any political figure, is scheduling conflict. What do you make of Trump being excluded from this by his own decision? And is it important? I mean, Trump does have such a huge lead right now, according to all available polling. Maybe really there's only downside potentially to being on that stage.
Right. I mean, I think that would be the rationale of him skipping the first date as well, right? I'm 30 points ahead of everyone else. So why would I put myself in a position that could only weaken me from here? I do think over time, though, as you see these other candidates get time and eyeballs on their positions and having the opportunity to sort of expound on what they believe in and really build their brand and their message, and the more that Donald Trump forfeits that, I think that he could lose some of that ground, right? I mean, ask yourself what Donald Trump is really running on this time around. Do you know what exactly he's running on besides his grievance about the 2020 election? Do you know where he stands on abortion, where the line should be drawn? Do we know really what he thinks about what should happen in Ukraine? The answer is we don't know any of those things about his positions, and it'll be harder and harder for him to just run inertia as we get further into the primary and other candidates have put their cards on the table on those issues.
Although, let me use Ukraine as an example among the issues. Donald Trump at least has the clearest end state in mind out of any of the candidates. Now, you may, of course, quibble over how he would accomplish this. He claims that he would end the war in 24 hours, and of course, you'd have to see it to believe it. But he says that the outcome he's angling for is peace. He wants to stop the dying. That's his position. That is, as short and sweet as that is, more pronounced than anything I've heard from any of these other candidates.
Well, I mean, I think Vivek Ramaswamy, who's obviously a second-tier candidate, is still pulling below everyone, although he has started to make some progress.
Yes.
Does have a pretty full-formed view on that. He said, he'd sort of leverage the incentive to get Russia away from the Russo-China alliance that they have and sort of incentivize Russia to come to the table. So there are other candidates who are saying how they would do it. But I mean, again, Donald Trump saying he'd end it in 24 hours, but how and why and where would the borders be? That hasn't been fleshed out, and he's not subjecting himself to any opportunities to flesh that out.
Yeah, it is funny though. Through the years, I can just imagine Trump's answer. If you had the opportunity, Sarah, right now to ask him that, well, give us the specifics. How would you do that? Well, I can't tell you because that's how we make this deal. I got to keep it a secret, because I got to keep my cards close to the vest. It's kind of the Trump way. But it does feel like today really is some sort of meaningful moment in this primary where these candidates are finally on stage. They're finally subjected to something more than just like a warm conversation. And now we are just over a month away from that first debate. It's coming at us very quickly.
That's right. And I think, it's interesting. Something dramatic has to happen to shake up the dynamics, right? It has led consistently by a significant double-digit margin for months now, and it seems like the regular rhythm of campaigning is not going to shake that up. So something dramatic has to happen. Someone has to have a breakout moment in the debate or in one of these forums. And, once we start getting into these set pieces, so to speak, these opportunities with a lot of a big spotlight shown on them for candidates to differentiate themselves or to humiliate themselves, either one, we might start to see those dynamics change.
So lastly, I'm seeing fundraising totals today because the second quarter is concluded and now we're starting to get some of these candidate fundraising totals. Biden and the associated vehicles around him, the DNC, but specifically the fundraising for his presidential campaign, is $72 million in the second quarter. This is a massive amount of money. Between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis and their affiliated organizations, $55 million combined. Are there any lessons in this that Joe Biden has just such a massive war chest building, and you were looking at Trump and DeSantis, and they're, at least in the second quarter, they're not that close to Biden? What's going on?
Well, I think, Biden is the only Democrat really on the left that's collecting money. And on the Republican side, you have millions of dollars being spread between a half dozen candidates or more. You are obviously going to see that money diluted. No one candidate on the right is going to pull in as much as Biden on the left. When he's raising money as an incumbent president and all the bells and whistles that comes with. He's been doing a lot of these high-dollar fundraisers out in Tony area of America, gets to roll up in the motorcade. I mean, that alone raises a lot of money. But you do have the money spread out right now among different Republican candidates. And until that field narrows down, I think you are going to see the primary candidates raising a little less money because none of the Republican candidates are sure bets right now.
Yeah.
But if you give money to Biden, you know that he's going to be in the general election. He's a safer investment from a political donor standpoint.
Well, that's a logical explanation for sure, because a lot of money may be waiting until the safe bet emerges. But man, with the lead Trump has at the moment, it's looking increasingly like that might be the guy. We will see. In the meantime, Sarah Bedford from the Washington Examiner, thank you as always. Please have a great weekend.
Thanks for having me. You too.
Good to talk to you. Let me play a little bit more from Mike Pence before we head off to traffic, because I do have all this Pence audio. You've got, let's see here. So Tucker goes on to ask Mike Pence whether or not he has confidence in America's electronic voting machines. Is this the kind of question that Republican voters care about? Yes, is the answer. Yes. They have concern about the integrity of our elections for a variety of reasons. And so Tucker raises it. Are you confident in electronic voting machines? Why is it that France does paper ballots? Why is it that so much of the Western world is paper ballot exclusive? Why did Jimmy Carter tell us early in this century that in order to ensure the integrity of elections, you need paper ballots and voter ID? Remember that? Democrat president. Here's Mike Pence asked today about electronic voting machines in the United States.
Are you confident that a country with electronic voting machines, ours, can have an election that you're participating in that everyone can trust?
Well, I believe we can, but I welcome the fact that since 2020, Republican-led states around the country have enacted election integrity reforms. I'm somebody that believes that, and Indiana was the first state to do this. I'm somebody that believes that you ought to be required to give a picture ID when you go in to vote. We ought to have voter ID in every state in America. But with regard to voting machines, I would tell you we had them in Indiana, but in Indiana and elsewhere, they produced paper ballots. Recounts were taken in states around the country. And I think it's absolutely essential that we do everything in our power to restore public confidence in the one person, one vote principle at the heart of this republic.
Why not just get rid of electronic voting machines and call it a day, and then we don't have to debate it?
Very popular in the room, as you can see. All right, more of the Mike Pence exchange, including on Ukraine. This is where things get a little heated with Tucker Carlson. It is a heated exchange, one of several, between Tucker Carlson and former Vice President Mike Pence on the issue of Ukraine. Pence going down the litany of reasons that Biden should be sending more tanks into Ukraine right now. And Tucker interrupts him to say this.
Along the way, the Biden administration has been slow in providing military support. Make no mistake about this. We promised them 33 Abrams tanks in January. I heard again 2 weeks ago in Ukraine, they still don't have them. We've been telling them we'll train their F-16 pilots, but now they're saying maybe January we'll let somebody transfer some jets.
I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President, I know you're running for president. You are distressed that the Ukrainians don't have enough American tanks. Every city in the United States has become much worse over the past 3 years.
Yeah.
Drive around. There's not one city that's gotten better in the United States. And it's visible. Our economy has degraded. The suicide rate has jumped. Public filth and disorder and crime have exponentially increased. And yet, your concern is that the Ukrainians, a country most people can't find on a map, who've received tens of billions of U.S. tax dollars, don't have enough tanks. I think it's a fair question to ask, where's the concern for the United States in that?
Well, it's not my concern. Tucker, I've heard that routine from you before, but that's not my concern. I'm running for president of the United States because I think this country's in a lot of trouble.
Now, I want to pause on this for a moment. First of all, excellent points by Tucker here to emphasize, wait a second, why is it this obsession with Ukraine and tanks without a clear end goal that serves the American interest? What is with that? But there's a moment there, you heard him at the end say, well, that's not my concern. That is not Pence saying that he's not concerned about the American people. I know some people on the right are sharing this today saying, oh, Pence is not concerned at all about America. That's not what he was saying. He was responding to Tucker's characterization from moments prior, but in a ham-fisted way. It didn't go well for Pence today. That's the summary of that, though. The truth of it. Did not go well for Pence today. The crowd much more with Tucker Carlson than they were with those candidates. I've got more for you. Coming up, we've got, Nikki Haley on stage today, Vivek Ramaswamy. You got Ron DeSantis slated to sit down and try his hand at this as well. And coming up, I've got Kurt Schlichter joining us. We're going to talk to him about the current president of the United States and his very creepy behavior is ahead.